my crafty people, I am Danny Dunn and welcome back to my channel, Crafty Gal Confessions. In this video, we're going to be creating a DIY anthropology-inspired gingerbread house doormat. I have come across some seriously stunning tutorials on Pinterest for similar concepts, and I just really wanted to make one. But everything that I saw was a freehand painted project. And I'll be honest, I am just not great with freehand painting, y'all. And I especially do not love the idea when it's on something like a doormat where fixing my mistakes are going to be impossible. So I really wanted to create a stenciled version for myself, but also for those who do not trust themselves with freehand painting. I'm sharing my hand-drawn stencil as both a PDF and a PNG file, so that you do have the option to print it off and cut out the pieces using an X-Acto knife if you don't have a machine. Or if you're blessed with a machine as I am, you can just run that PNG file through your machine's software and make life a lot easier on yourself. Be sure to check out my full write-up on this tutorial on my blog, where you'll also find the details on how to use the PDF version if you don't have a machine. But you'll also find all the affiliate links for a few of these supplies that I'm about to mention. Now let's get into it. Here's a full list of supplies that you're going to need for this project. My particular doormat is from Joann's, but you can find these plain doormats at a variety of places, including Walmart, Target, IKEA, and of course Amazon, which I've linked on my blog. I'm just using plain old Reynolds freezer paper here, and I'm cutting it down to the size of my mat. But if you're going to be doing the print then cut version, be sure to read through all the details on my blog post because you will need to make a few adjustments. You're also going to need to use heat-resistant transfer tape. It cannot just be any transfer tape. It's got to be heat-resistant. First, I'm starting by adjusting my file size to fit my doormat and cutting out my stencil pieces using my Cricut Maker machine. You'll want to adjust your file so that it's just a tad smaller than your actual doormat, as we're going to be cutting out the shape of the house in the end. This stencil is broken up into 4 separate pieces, and you're going to need to run each piece separately. Then piece them together in the end using painter's tape. When placing the paper on the mat, be sure you're putting the wax side down, as in the waxy side of that freezer paper is touching the sticky mat. After weeding out each stencil piece, I remove them from the mat using my heat-resistant tape and peeling the mat away from the stencil as opposed to peeling the stencil away from the mat. This technique makes removing the stencil much more seamless with less struggle and fewer air bubbles in the end. You'll see here that I did decide to get out my rotary knife and my ruler just to clean up the edges of my sloppy cuts on that freezer paper. This isn't necessary, it was just bothering me and I thought it might be helpful in lining up that final stencil. That's why I didn't note this on the supply list, but I just wanted to comment on that since you see me using those tools here. Now I'm skipping ahead. I've got all 4 sections of my stencil ready and I'm lining them up to attach and create one uniform stencil. I did this by flipping them over and sticking them right onto my table and attaching the seams using painter's tape. Now we are ready to adhere that freezer paper to the mat. And so begins my least favorite part, and I'm willing to bet it'll be yours as well. Not gonna lie, guys, I thought this part of the process was gonna go so much easier than it did, so I'm just giving you fair warning. You'll see here in the video I do struggle a bit to get that freezer paper to stick to the mat, but I did develop a little bit of a technique as I went along, and I'll share that with you now. As you're going, work in slightly smaller sections and peel up the transfer tape while it's still hot and a little more malleable. Once you've gotten it to release the freezer paper pieces, cut away the transfer tape that you're done with. And you'll have to go back and repress a few pieces here and there, as some of them won't stick or some will move. So in the end, you just need it to be barely stuck to the mat. It's not going to be like sticking vinyl to metal. It's a lot less of a fusion that's happening. You need just enough that it's held in place. Finally, all the pieces are in place and I used painter's tape around the edges as well as a couple little spots that I felt needed reinforcing. I originally thought that I was going to be using a sponge dab brush for the painting, so you see that laying on the table in the frame. But I actually ended up deciding that a regular paintbrush was easier to work with. I also used a lot more paint than I thought I would. Be sure you've got plenty on hand because a small bottle is not going to cut it. That mat just soaks it right up. So make sure you buy the big bottle of craft paint or maybe even a quart size of latex paint from the hardware store would be great. Now painting and painting and painting some more. Working in small sections, I'm using my fingers to sort of press down the smaller pieces of the stencil as I paint around them. Some of those pieces did feel like they might start lifting up, so just holding them in place with one hand while I paint with the other. All right, our paint is finished, and it felt like it took forever, but we're here. I went ahead and peeled up my stencil while it was still wet. You can do it while it's wet or dry. Just be careful if it's wet to make sure you don't get any paint where it doesn't need to go. Let that fully dry for a couple hours before moving on to the next step. You'll see I did get a little impatient here and may have moved on a little early, and I ended up with some white paint on my scissors. Whoops. But once it feels totally dry, go ahead and use your scissors to cut out the perimeter of the house. My scissors are not technically heavy-duty scissors. They are just scissors that I didn't mind completely destroying. I do recommend using actual heavy-duty scissors because this was quite the hand workout. But if you don't have heavy-duty ones, they can be kind of expensive. You can use a cheaper pair. Just know that you're going to completely destroy them. This project was a little more tedious than I thought it was going to be at the start, but I am just in love with how it turned out. Be sure to head on over to my blog post for a full write-up of this tutorial, as well as links for supplies and your free file for the stencil. Like and subscribe to my channel and my email list to be notified of all future crafty projects. That's a wrap, y'all. Happy holidays and happy crafting.